Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today, PBO is working with UCSD and WADE to provide a business ethics webinar, which is giving voices to values. And this is a really great webinar that we've actually taken. All of our staff members have also taken the business ethics classes with WADE and really enjoy them. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. One, we will have a Q&A at the end, but there's also a questions area in your screen. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, please put them in and we will get the panelists to answer those questions. Also know that this webinar is being recorded, so it will be available to you maybe a few hours after the webinar is completed. So no need to take feverish notes, just sit back and enjoy. And with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. Today we have Wade Lindenberger, and Wade has over 25 years of experience in accounting, management, corporate governance, and ethics. He's a CPA, and in 2015, he won the CFO of the Year Award for the nonprofit category. He currently teaches accounting, finance, and ethics courses at UCSD Rady School of Management. And in 2020, he was presented with the Excellence in Teaching Award for his work with the Masters of Professional Accounting program at Rady. So welcome, Wade. We're so happy to have you, and we enjoy your classes both internally and externally. So, and also we have Anita Rigosa, and Anita is a consulting director for our HR service line at PBO Advisory Group. Anita brings over 14 years of experience in human resources, and as a consulting director at PBO, Anita works with executive leadership to identify strategic personnel initiatives and implement programs unique to each company's culture. Anita's expertise spans a variety of industries with in-depth experience in employee relations, compensation, and benefits, HRIS technologies, compliance, coaching, and development. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wade, and he's going to give you some information about ethics.
All right, good morning, all. Welcome to this seminar that we're having. And I want to start with a little preface before I get to Warren Buffett here. I want to talk about my experience with ethics and integrity. And I come from a practical background. As Fran said, I spent a lot of time in industry, in consulting, and I was a CFO, and I was also a consultant. So I come at ethics and integrity from a very practical standpoint. And when I first started teaching ethics at the university level, I reflected on my career and my relationship with ethics and integrity. And I've always had a good relationship with ethics and integrity. It's been very important to me. It's been very important that people see me as a person with integrity. But I never really sat down and looked at the nuts and bolts and the mechanics of ethics and how I approach it. So I went through a reflective process, and I really took the time to look at the specific steps I take, how I approach specific ethics situations, and it was very helpful to me. And I now do that on a periodic basis to keep in touch with my ethics and integrity. So I think for you, I can bring that experience to you, and I can walk you through how I reflected, what I learned from that, and the tools that I use. And that's what the subject of today will be. And I also wanted to mention that Fran and I were talking before the webinar began, and in the strategic planning process, you should have a component of ethics and integrity so you can all get together and have that touch point for yourselves. So having said that, I want to start with why ethics is important. And again, we all, I think, know intuitively why ethics is important, but I think it's important to reflect on it. And there are three big reasons. And the first one is Warren Buffett, who you have the picture of him in front of you there. And his quote is, and I'll read this, "It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently." And if you think about it, you as a professional, you spend your career building your reputation. You want people to look at you as a positive professional, as a professional with integrity, as a professional that gets things done. And I think that goes to the heart of this quote, goes to the heart of that. So I think it's very important, because you can lose your reputation in 1 minute if you take a wrong step. So you really want to reinforce what your ethics and integrity are, and that will keep your reputation intact. Next slide, please. And then this quote is from Anita Roddick, who's the Body Shop founder, and she said, "Being good is good for business." This goes to the heart of the ESG movement, environmental, social, and governance, that I'm sure many of you have heard about, corporate sustainability, corporate responsibility. And there really is a move, especially with the younger generations, to look for companies and to invest in companies who are doing the right things, who are doing things for the environment, who are doing things socially for their employees, for their community, and who are practicing proper governance. So this quote goes to the heart of that. And that's another reason why it's important to be ethical and have integrity, is because it will be good for your stock price, it will be good for your profitability. Next slide, please. And that leads to this slide. And as I mentioned, being ethical is good for your profitability and for your stock price. And this is from the world's most ethical companies list. And it said that the companies listed in the world's most ethical companies ranking outperformed large cap sector over 5 years by 14.4% and over 3 years by 10.5%. So we often hear, I hear people say, well, if we have to do all these extra things to be ethical, then we're going to have more cost and it's just going to be a lot more work, and we don't really have the time to do that. Well, it's not true. When it comes down to it, not only can you feel good about doing the right thing, but your company can benefit from it too, both again in the stock price and in the profitability. Next slide, please. So what is ethics? Let's talk about what ethics is. And again, I reflected on this when I was getting ready to teach my ethics classes about 5-6 years ago. And I thought really long and hard about ethics. And what I wanted was, because I'd been in industry and because I'd had a practical career, I wanted an ethics definition that wasn't something from a textbook, that wasn't something from a philosopher. I wanted something that was practical, that I could remember and I could use in any circumstances. So when I reflected on that ethics definition, next slide, please, I came up with a very simple approach to that. And that approach is simply to think in terms of right or wrong. And that sounds intuitive, right? But I think it's good to state that. So think in terms of right or wrong, and then you can define an ethical act as something that is right or wrong according to your principles or standards. And we'll get to your principles or standards in a second, because I think that's the real critical part of this. But an unethical act, on the other hand, is wrong according to your principles or standards. And again, what I want something that was practical and easy to use, no 4-syllable words. For example, Aristotle says practical wisdom is a definition of ethics. That's fine, but I can't really access that when I'm in an ethical dilemma, okay? So let's go to the next slide, please. And this is where we define what's right or wrong. So what I did was I reflected on my core values. What is most important to me? And core values are also called intrinsic values or protected values. And I like the protected values because it indicates that if a value is important to you, you will protect it, even at the risk of personal injury or harm. So that's a really powerful thing. So core values are the critical things. They're the critical standards by which you measure right or wrong. And I've provided as an example the PBO core values, and they are accountability, collaboration, community, ethical, and loyalty and kindness. And each organization has slightly different core values. UCSD has 6 core values. And to define those, we'll go to the next slide and see what those are in a little more detail. So accountability is we take responsibility for individual and collective actions. A very basic one, but one that's very important. Collaboration, rather than working separately, we work together to achieve our goals, okay? And we support each other, all right? Community, We support the communities in which we live and work. That touches on the being good is good for business, right? We are active in our community. We have environment. We have social, meaning our community in mind. We are having governance in mind as well. Ethical means we embrace the code of ethics, and that gets to the governance part. And then loyalty and kindness. So a strong sense of support and allegiance, treating clients and each other with integrity, kindness, dignity, and respect. So we can use these core values, internalize them, make sure they're very important and that we focus on them. And then when we're in a specific ethical situation or an ethics situation, we can measure whether something is ethical or not ethical based on those very important values that we hold. Okay. All right. So let's go to this page, and then I want to turn it over to Anita for a few minutes. So I came up with this example of an ethics definition, and I teach this to all my students. I teach it to all professionals that I interact with, and many of them may have the same ethics definition or very close, but it gives them something to articulate how they go about a situation. So the first component of it is I will distinguish between right, ethical. So right is equated with ethical, and wrong, unethical, using my core values. And in this case, I'm using the PBO core values that we talked about before. If an act supports and is consistent with my core values, I will consider it right or ethical. If an act does not support my core values, one or more of my core values, I will consider it wrong or unethical. And then the last part of this component is what will take us from our definition to how we navigate an ethical situation. And I call it the ethical GPS. And what it is, it's a step-by-step for determining if something is an ethical issue and then navigating and determining what we will do with that ethical issue once we've encountered it. So that I'll go over that after Anita speaks about a couple of other topics. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anita, and she'll talk to you about business ethics and some HR issues related to ethics.
Hi, good morning. So I'm going to be speaking on from the HR perspective. We do have a slide here on business ethics and the definition of business ethics, and maybe Fran will jump in to speak to this a little bit as well. The definition that we've established was business ethics is the study of appropriate business policies and practices regarding potentially controversial subjects, including corporate governance, insider trading, bribery, discrimination, corporate social responsibilities, and fiduciary responsibilities. And then what is, go to the next slide, please. And then what's the role of ethics in HR? HR practitioners have an ethical responsibility to foster and promote fairness and equity to the employees of their organization and to create sustained and safe, healthy environments that encourage individuals and the organization to reach their fullest potential in a positive and productive manner. Next slide, please. So some of the ethical issues that we face in HR are in the areas of employment, performance appraisals, privacy and confidentiality, safety and health, compensation and incentive plans. And just to elaborate a little bit more on that, in the employment area, some of the unethical practices that or dilemmas that folks are faced with are hiring the best fit for the role. So, you know, making sure that you have defined a criteria set on what exactly you are looking for in the role, and then sticking to that. Sometimes you'll have referrals come in from folks that'll say, you know, I have somebody that I'd really like to put in this position. We really need to go through our due diligence to go through the entire hiring process and make sure that we're giving everybody an equal opportunity to have that time to be interviewed and checked for their, you know, the skills that match that role. Performance appraisals, this is one that's always been a little bit tough, and because we have managers that are responsible for the development of their direct reports. And in the performance appraisal process, we have dilemmas where a manager may rate somebody higher than they actually should be rated based off of several different factors: the closeness to the employee, a sense of loyalty, inability to really assess the skills in a way that fairly rates them. And then you have some of the managers that may have not rated those folks who should have been rated higher. So it's really important when you're going through the performance and appraisal process to include HR in those conversations, and so that HR has some visibility into the reports that will be shared with the employees, so that we can provide feedback to make sure that they really are in line and fair across the board. Privacy and confidentiality is huge. We need to make sure that all of our employment and private personnel information is secure and safe. That means down to the papers that are on the desk and the stuff that's in the file, making sure that those are all closed and locked, and then that our security systems are tight, that people don't have access to information that they're not privy to, so that we make sure that the employees know that the information that we have on them is kept safe. Safety and health, this is a huge one right now as people return to the office after or post or kind of post-COVID. We're all learning about this together and wanting to make sure that we all feel safe as we return to the office or in the environments that we're in. We're starting to gather together, making sure that we have plans in place and resources available to help people feel safe. Compensation and incentive plans, making sure that you are paying our folks fairly and equitably, that we have policies in place that are clear, that define how we pay people, the resources that we use, the methodology, and then staying consistent to those. Next slide, please. So some employer best practices, policies, really establishing some solid policies regarding discrimination, sexual harassment, and the treatment of employees, making sure that those policies are reviewed on a regular basis, that they're updated as the laws are ever changing, that we make sure that we have the most up-to-date information in all of our policies. And then training, it's huge. Train as much as you possibly can. Provide regular ethical training programs to make sure that employees are fully aware of the company policies and expectations. Holding people accountable, making sure that when there is an issue that arises, that we do our due diligence to investigate that, to document that, to clearly make sure that the situation has been addressed, that those who may have been in a space where they need to have corrective action, that they are held accountable to that, and staying consistent in that practice to all that you handle within the organization. And then most importantly, lead by example. It's so important for the leadership of the organization from the top down to relay the message to their organization about how to create a culture that is mutually respectful and full of dignity, with ethical decision making and value that are valued and rewarded. Making sure that they clearly understand that there will be zero tolerance from the top down. We will not play favoritism. Sometimes you'll see where there's some dilemmas regarding the treatment of those maybe in a different position, a higher level position than those at the line level, making sure that you stay consistent, that the policies are consistent, and the training and accountability. And with that, I will hand that back over to Fran. Thank you.
Yeah, Wade and I were talking earlier about really the ongoing conversation in an organization about ethics and values, which is really quite fun to go into your strategic planning and revisit our ethics and values and how they relate to our plans as we move through the day. And the same is true for human resources. You know, Anita and I have lots of conversations about how we live our values in any given moment. So it's really great to put this into action. So with that being said, we're going to give you a little question polling to see how you would handle this particular situation. And then we can apply what Wade talked about, the ethical GPS process. So here's an example. There will be some multiple choice at the end in the next slide, but what is the situation is that you work at home or company and you've received a call from a colleague, Steve is his name, asking you to send confidential client information by email. And he says he needs it right away, and then it will take too long to send through your usual process where you would have safety and confidential information. And he says, just send it via email and he'll owe you one. The company, however, prohibits the sending of such information via email. So in this particular situation, what would you do? And then go ahead and choose your answer. 1 is refuse to send the information to him. 2 is send the information through approved channels only. 3, send the information to him by email as requested. And once you all select your answers, I think we can close the poll. This is okay. 100% of you said send the information through approved channels. So very interesting. Yay, good job. And you know, this is an ongoing dialogue as you're in certain circumstances. And you know, this is a very specific example of what Anita was talking about with the confidentiality of employee information. We certainly, as employees, all of us are employees, would not want our information shared. And Wade, I have some wonder what you think about this and the answer to this question.
Thanks, Fran. Yeah, first of all, great answer. And it seemed fairly straightforward in this situation. But I want to focus on a specific situation that happened that this question was based on. In that situation, the individual decided to email, which may not sound like a big deal, but what ended up happening was we know that email is a manual process to a certain extent, and we know that we can make mistakes, especially when we're distracted. So in this situation, the person emailed, but they accidentally emailed to a competitor of their client because the email addresses were very similar. So then it created a whole nother layer of issues that the company had to address, and it could have been avoided simply by doing the right thing and going through the channels. And the company sets up those channels for a reason, right? So that the company's protected and you're protected from sending information to the wrong people and inappropriately.
Wow, that's incredible. You know, another thing that's of great consideration right now, Wade, is as we all are working home remotely, there are much more instances of cyber security challenges. And so it really is important for us to hold that confidential information and go through the appropriate processes, because businesses are getting increasingly hit by cyber challenges, and the companies have invested in these infrastructures to make sure that we take care of confidential information.
Definitely agree with that. Well said.
Yeah. So next we have another question for you, and this is near and dear to a lot of CPA, accounting, and finance people. So we have a controller at Brookings Incorporated, which is one of our clients, and they recorded a material sale of merchandise on the last day of the first quarter. Now, Dale never received notification of the sales invoice or received any shipping documentation to ascertain that the sales transaction had actually occurred. And although this was a departure from company policy, Dale recorded the transaction. So as we review the financial statements and we notice the sale as part of our review, we ask the controller, and he says that he does not have the documentation, but that he expects it shortly. Meanwhile, he says he intends to issue the financial statements to the bank because they are due. So in this circumstance, what would you do? 1, support the controller's decision. 2, suggest that the controller ask the bank for more time. Or 3, ask the controller to reverse the sale. Okay, so the answer, 100% of you voted on ask the controller to reverse the sale. So I'm going to hand it over to Wade and have him share his insights on that.
Yeah, so I think that is a good answer, because you basically are recording something that you don't have documentation for, and that's never right thing to do, right? Because we've been in situations before where we think something's going to come through a certain way and it'll document and corroborate what we're going to do, but then it turns out that there are additional details we have to cover, or we have to follow up with more questions. So the right thing to do is to wait until you get that documentation. And in concert, you may also contact the bank and say, hey, listen, we just have an administrative issue here. Can you give us an extra 24 hours to file the financial statements? And if you have a good relationship with your bank, chances are they're going to say, that's fine, just make sure you get it to us by then. But doing the right thing, I think, is best, because if you issue something to the bank and it's not right and we find out that it has to be reversed later, that creates a whole nother layer of problems for us.
Yes, and so and always more communication is better than not. So contacting the bank is never a bad idea, and to ask for more time if you need it. That's part of what we can do to proactively manage our clients' expectations and bank and tax and audit, etc. So Wade is going to talk a little bit about the process we just went through and using the ethical GPS to go through the situations that are happening every day in your world, and having a process or a system that will help provide you a framework to address any situation that comes up.
All right. Thanks, Fran. So this is, as Fran said, it's a process that you can go through. And when I was in my reflection phase on ethics, I decided to write down the process that I'd been using my whole career. So it was basically something that was ingrained in me, but writing it down helped me to focus on some key things that I wanted to make sure that I took into account when I was looking at ethical dilemmas. So I want to preface this by saying that this is in a perfect world, this ethical GPS. If you've got plenty of time, or if you've got a little bit of time where you can reflect, or if you can buy yourself some time to reflect, then you can go through the ethical GPS. Sometimes you're in the heat of the moment and you will need to make a decision. So it's good if you can internalize your ethical GPS like I have done, and that way it's a quick, intuitive process. And maybe you already feel like you have the ability to do it intuitively, and that's great, but it's still good to revisit it once in a while. So one other thing I just wanted to mention is, before we go on to the ethical GPS, Anita talked about making sure that you follow processes, and also making sure that ethics and other
I think we lost Wade. Wade, are you there? Okay, I think we're having some technical difficulties. So I will go on with walking through some of this information as Wade gets back online. Okay, so as Wade was saying, his ethical GPS, once you decide that you're faced with an ethical dilemma, the ethical GPS really helps you navigate through a decision-making process. So what Wade's steps are is that, one, you determine whether you're facing an ethical dilemma. And then two, you determine who the stakeholders are. Three, you determine your professional obligations. Most of us have human resource, financial, and accounting obligations, and we also have CPA licenses that we need to work on. Oh, I think Wade is back.
My apologies for that.
That's okay. So I'll hand it back over to you, number 4, gather facts.
Okay. All right. My apologies. So, so first of all, you're on step 4 now. When did you hear me when I was talking about the culture of an organization?
No, we did not.
We did not.
Okay. All right. I'll come back to that in a minute. Let's keep going with the ethical GPS. So the first 3 steps that we've gone through already, just want to circle back to the stakeholders. I think stakeholders are really important because if you look at a narrow set of stakeholders, and by the way, stakeholders, as we know, are people that can be impacted by an ethical event, right? Either positively or negatively, but they'll have some impact, and typically it will be a material impact. It'll be something that is harmful or costs them something. So stakeholders, you want to try to draw them as broadly as possible so that you're including everybody that should be considered in the situation. I'll give you an example real quick. Let's say you're designing a product, because I think product design is always a good thing to look at. If you're only thinking about the product and the company and the profitability, and you're not thinking about the end users, and you rush through a process and you build a product that has defects and could cause injury, but you go ahead with it anyways, you're really not looking at all of your stakeholders by doing that. You're only looking at the company and the internal stakeholders. So stakeholders is very important to frame your ethical situation and to make the right ethical decision. All right, so let's go to 4. So gather facts is a very important step. And Anita alluded to that in the HR process. You need to deal with facts. And sometimes we're ready to go, and maybe we're using our emotional thought process as opposed to our rational thought process. But until you gather facts, you can't really make a good decision. So to the extent you have time, figure out what's really going on. And I'll give you an example in a company that I worked for. Names will be, obviously confidential, and the company will be confidential. But I had a person that reported to me, and his staff was a person who reported to him, obviously. And what happened was somebody came to me and said, well, we think, so-and-so has been drinking on the job. So if you don't gather the facts in that situation, and Anita, obviously, as an HR person, she would say you definitely need to gather the facts and make a decision. But if you jump to conclusions, you might reach a different result. What ended up happening was I did some fact finding, and I found out that this individual took a certain type of medication that smells like alcohol, and the issue was resolved. So if we had jumped to conclusions, we might have ruined somebody's reputation or damaged somebody's reputation. So gathering facts is very, very important. 5 to me is really critical. And what I always say is, in your life, think periodically about who the people are that you trust the most, who are advisors, okay? You obviously have to be careful with confidential information when you're talking about ethical dilemmas, but trusted advisors are people who give you answers that are quality answers. In other words, they're not yes people, that are willing to say, I think you're wrong here, that listen, okay, and that consider things thoughtfully and objectively. And they're people you ultimately trust. So if you haven't done this lately, think about those 3 or 4 people in your network who are trusted advisors, the ones that are go-tos for you, the ones where you can talk to them and you can tell them things and they can tell you what they think honestly. And so that's an important step, I think, in the ethics process, is to go to those people and bounce things off of them. I'll give you another example. I had an ethical dilemma recently, and I have 4 different people who I consider trusted advisors. I went through the process on my own. I went through steps 1 through 4, and then I had some preliminary ideas of what I wanted to do. And I went to them and I said, "What do you think about this?" And I gave them the facts, but I didn't tell them what my thought process was. They came back with their opinion, and what happened was I adjusted my approach a little bit based on what I heard from them. So that is a great way to go. This next step, step 6, is something that I think is really important to crystallize your decision process. You've gathered the facts, you've talked to your trusted advisors. Now what you can do is you can actually write down your options and analyze your pros and cons. And as an accountant, I like to do T accounts. I just draw a T and I go pros and cons for option 1, pros and cons for option 2, pros and cons for option 3. And then I go through it. And when you're thinking about options, one option is always to do nothing, right? But I've found in my experience that doing nothing is not necessarily the best way to go, right? So come up with good options. Maybe it's only 2 options, maybe it's 3. Don't come up with 12 options. Boil it down to the ones that are most important. And then do your pros and cons. And then, so far, this process has involved facts, right? A very rational, a very logical approach. I think there's room also for your conscience, what I call your conscience, or the emotional side and how you're reacting to things. So when you've done your pros and cons and you've decided on the best course of action, check your heart to see if that's right. Now, that's not saying that your heart maybe your heart doesn't agree with the approach you're deciding to take, and that's okay, but you want to just reconcile the two and make sure you're doing the right thing. That's what I like to do. Okay, once you've done that, you want to act clearly and decisively. And I've seen times when people drag things out, right? Because they're worried. It's never pleasant to be in an ethical situation. It's never pleasant to deliver bad news. It's never pleasant to go against somebody else's wishes or somebody else's idea of things. So you really want to act clearly and decisively, because if you wait, nothing good can come of that, and others may suffer, and it may just make the situation worse. The last step that I want to talk about is conducting a lessons learned, because once you're done, this is an iterative process. This ethical GPS is something that can be with you for the rest of your life. So you want to learn, and I like to sit down and ask myself, did I do everything the best way I could? I don't beat myself up, but I also ask myself, what can I do better next time? Could I have gathered more facts? Could I have done a better job of figuring out what my options are? Maybe I waited a little longer than I should have, and I should have acted more quickly. But conduct the lessons learned so that you can make sure that you keep the process improving over time. And the last thing I'll say about the ethical GPS before I leave the slide is, this is just a model that's a starting point. You should adapt what you think is comfortable, and you probably already have a process. Look at that process, write it down, and then revisit it periodically and internalize it if you don't feel like it's adequately internalized, so that you can act quickly in a quick situation. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Fran for the next poll.
Okay, so now we have another situation where your organization, your business or nonprofit, has been contacted by a potential revenue source that is outside your standard product or service offering. And that new contract provides an opportunity to add revenue to your organization. So what would be the steps or action items that you would approach? And next slide, and we're going to give you some options. 1, ask for a contract and charge ahead toward getting a deal signed. 2, graciously decline an offer to do business with them. Or 3, request meeting with key stakeholders to discuss the opportunity. All right. Okay, 100% said request meeting with key stakeholders to discuss the opportunity. A lot of us see this, at clients or in nonprofits or in organizations where things come up. And so as part of Wade's ethical GPS steps, one of his steps are, determine who the key stakeholders are and then look at the opportunity, gather the facts. So that's exactly what this poll is indicating, is that that's what we would do, is we would start to connect with the stakeholders and gather the facts to make a meaningful decision. I'm going to hand it over to Wade and see if he has any more insight on this one.
I think you said it really well, Fran. The only thing I would add is we all know how important trust is in a nonprofit in particular, and keeping in mind that trust factor and making sure that you're taking an ethical process that honors that trust is actually absolutely critical in that environment. And I think this approach does that, definitely.
Yep. Oftentimes, some of us sit on boards of nonprofits. Some of the things, we are entrusting the public. We're board members that are making decisions on behalf of a public organization. So it's a really great exercise to go through evaluating opportunities as they come up. So here's another poll for you all. Right now, you're working at Lily Evans' company, and your colleague and good friend Terry, that you usually go jogging with on Saturday mornings, mentions that he got his paycheck this week and it had an error. And he says that the good news is that the error was in his favor and the company overpaid him $900. And he says that he's not going to say anything to payroll, as he believes it is their responsibility to identify and correct the error. If they do not identify the error, he plans to keep the money and add it to his down payment on his new car. So in that particular situation, what would you do? Would you nod your head and change the subject? Would you talk him into reporting the error? Or would you report him to payroll for not reporting the error? Okay, 100% of you voted on trying to talk him into reporting the error. Now I'm going to hand this one to Anita, who works with HR a good amount. Well, maybe I'll hand it to Wade, and then Wade, you can hand it to Anita. And Wade, you can talk about this a little bit, and then Anita can weigh in as well.
Okay, so from my standpoint, from an accounting standpoint, when I look at this, and I've managed payroll departments, payroll typically finds errors. So if you think they're not going to find errors, then you're mistaken. And secondly, once they find the error, it's not going to reflect very well on you. And besides that, it's not your money. So bottom line, try to talk him into reporting the error, and hopefully he'll come to his senses. If not, you would have to consider other options of potentially what to do. And I'll turn it over to Anita for the HR perspective.
Thank you, Wade. Yeah, I agree. So I think my approach would be twofold here. So definitely would first try to talk to him about reporting the error and encourage him to do the right thing, because he knows the money is not his and he should be giving that back to the company. And then if that didn't work and he did not report the error, yes, I think I would have an ethical dilemma upon myself to make sure that I reported what I knew to be wrong to the payroll department, so that they could then work with the employee to correct the error. Turn that over to you, Fran.
Yeah, and think about it as an employee. Eventually that error will likely be caught. And so then you have coworkers who also understand that maybe you didn't report that. And so it does raise a credibility issue among coworkers at some point if you're in that certain situation. So there are so many layers to ethics and the choices that we make in these sorts of circumstances that can impact us as a professional. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Wade, and we're going to talk a little bit more about giving voice to our values.
Thanks a lot, Fran. So this is really the most important step, if you will. You can go through the process, you can determine what your actions will be, you can even take action. But if you take action without thinking it through and figuring out the best way to communicate it, then you may fail and everybody else may suffer as a result. So before you actually approach someone about your solution to an ethical situation, you really want to give thought to how you are going to voice your values, because that's what this is really about. Is you've determined based on your values that you have an ethical situation, an ethical dilemma, and you think that something needs to be done, and you've decided what the process is that you want to go through. So now you're going to voice your values, and it's very important to take the time to voice your values in the most effective and efficient way that you can. Okay, so that's the hard part, right? That's the part that perhaps is the hardest, but it's also really the most important part, because everything will be for naught if you don't succeed in this part of the process. Okay, so really giving voice to values is a set of techniques that gives you a way to advocate for your position. And what I call it is hearts and minds. You're trying to win hearts and minds, because in an ethical situation, it's very important. It's very important. So you're trying to win hearts and minds, and you're thinking about things like, who should I go to for support? You want to think strategically about who will best be your ally to make sure that you can have the support you need to succeed. Okay, what should you say to convince others? And you may want to appeal to common values. That's where your values come in again. If you have values that you think are important, and you also look at your company values, you can look at company values to build a common position with others, and you can appeal to that connection that you have. And I think that can be very helpful. You can also think through how the situation might go, and you can think about how you would respond to the way that person responds to your initial thoughts on the ethical dilemma, right? So you can think through, you can role play, you can try to figure out what others will say, what they will do, and try to anticipate and have answers, right? And then you can think about other things that you might need to do to be acted upon, or to be heard in your situation. You may end up having to go to HR, you may have to go to an audit committee, you may have to use the hotline that's available to you. There are a lot of different things you might have to do, but think through the process, because the stakes are high when it comes to giving voice to values. Next slide, please. Okay, so the bottom line is, ethical actions, they make a difference only after you can really find a way to communicate and win those hearts and minds. That's really what it comes down to. And giving voice to values, that process I went through, can really help you do that. Next slide, please. So I want to leave you with a couple things here. We want to leave you with a couple things, I should say. The first is, real quickly, top 5 ingredients for an ethical company. This is a list that I came up with, and I distilled it from a lot of different information. And Anita has talked about some of these things in her slides as well. The first one is tone at the top, right? The leadership has to set the tone for the rest of the company. If they're not setting the tone, why would the rest of the company follow along? So that tone at the top is absolutely critical. And I would argue that anything else you do, if you don't have the tone at the top, is going to be a failure. Secondly, you need to communicate clearly and regularly. And this goes back to what I was talking about before, is company culture and an ethical culture. You want to build things into the fabric of your company, okay? But you want to do that by communicating clearly and regularly. So that means lots of different things. It may mean the annual ethics training. It may mean ethics moments where you have videos or little emails that you send to people, but you keep them in touch with the ethical approach of the company all along. And as I mentioned, doing right should be the fabric of the company, part of the fabric, not just an annual event. So it's something they should live and breathe and feel is important on a day-to-day basis. So when you put together your code of conduct, which is the guide for your employees in ethical situations, what you should do is you should make it very, very easy to use, very accessible, something that they can access regularly and they will think of when they're in an ethical situation. Treating the employees well is absolutely critical, and Anita touched on this as well in her slides. And that doesn't just mean compensation and benefits, but it also means meaningful work, and it also means treating your employees with respect. And that's the S in the ESG, the social part, but that is all critical. And then the company should be a force for good in the community. Again, that's in the PBO core values, and that's a critical thing to be an ethical company. Next slide, please. So our challenge to you, we'd like to leave you with these things. First of all, get comfortable with your, and we call it here your personal ethics definition, but that's that definition that I talked about at the beginning here. Get comfortable with that, internalize it, revisit it periodically, reflect on it. Internalize your core values, because those are the critical touch points that you need to be able to make ethical decisions, okay? Think of ethics as part of your culture, not an annual training event. Act like, even if you're not the CEO, if you're the CEO, you should definitely set the right tone, but even if you're not the CEO, you should be the CEO of your part of the company, and you should set that right ethical tone all along. There is a saying about, it's called the broken windows theory in one of the books that I've read. And what the broken windows theory is, if there's a little chip in your windshield, there's time to fix it, right? But if there is a spidering of your windshield, then it's too late to fix it and your windshield will have to be replaced. It's the same with ethical acts. Set the right tone. When you have a little chip in your company, fix that chip, don't let it spider. And then make the ethical choice every time. And I love that phrase, and I keep it in my mind. Make the ethical choice every time, because if you do that, then everything will be better because of it. And I'll turn it back over to Fran at this point. Fran, are you there?
Sorry, technical difficulties. I'm back.
Okay.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Anita and Wade. There are a few questions that we have in the audience, and first one is, we'll ask Wade, is why is it important to be ethical?
Okay, so I think the critical reasons are, number one, reputation. You as an individual and your company spend the time to have a good reputation. And if you are not ethical, then you risk losing that. Going back to the payroll example, if you decide that you want to try to keep the money for payroll, then that's going to reflect poorly on you and on your reputation. Whereas if you take the right step, then you'll be thought of as a positive person, as an ethical person. There are companies out there, and I won't mention any names, but there are companies out there right now that are going through their own reputation crisis, and it is impacting business. And if you don't have a good reputation in business, if you're a sole source for something, people will continue to go to you. But if they have another option, somebody that they trust and somebody that has integrity, then they will ultimately go to that other company. So it can hurt your business. But the biggest reason to be ethical is that it's good for your soul. That's a very important thing, and health is very important. And then finally, as a company, statistics are showing that if you are ethical, you'll be more profitable, your stock price will go up, and more people will want to do business with you. So I think those are some reasons why it's important to be ethical.
This next question is for me, actually. It says, how do core values play a role in the ethics decision-making process? It's a great question. I mean, from a business point of view, we're often making decisions about revenue or people or resource allocation. And so understanding our core values really helps inform our decision-making process. And, that goes anywhere from, how do we want to be treated, or how do we want to conduct meetings together, to how do we want to tackle a new service line. So the core values are really the foundation by which everything grows out of, and so it's a critical component. And if we don't understand our core values, it would be harder to navigate through that decision-making process. And so the next question here is actually about that, and this is for you, Wade. Is there a systematic way to navigate through those ethical dilemmas?
I would say yes, and I would go back to the ethical GPS. And so what you would do is, let me just give you a quick scenario. I had an ethical dilemma that I faced quite recently, and it was a pretty serious one. The first thing I did was I ran through my ethical definition, my definition of ethics, and I said to myself, is this an ethical dilemma? Is this a potential unethical situation? And I referenced my core values to what Fran said. I looked at my core values and I said, are any of my core values being violated by this ethical situation? I found that there were a couple of core values that were being compromised, so I was able to make my decision. Then I went into the mode of, I need to gather more facts, make sure that I understand this situation completely and that I'm not misrepresenting what's happening. And then I made a quick call to my trusted advisors and said, hey, what would you do in this situation? Once I had that, I made a couple of options, 3 options. I actually listed them. I looked at the pros and cons of each option, weighed those, and then said to myself, okay, this is the right option. And then I went ahead and I acted. So I think the ethical GPS is a great step-by-step that you can use. And the beauty of it is it can be abbreviated if you're in a quicker situation. And one thing I would say just real quickly too is if you're in a situation where you have to move fast, internalizing those steps is important, but also you might be able to buy yourself time. You may be able to say, I need to think about this, or let's meet on this tomorrow. And that way you can deliberate a little more rather than being on the spot and having to make a snap decision.
Excellent. So there's another question from the audience. For a company who does not have their core values identified, how do you go about identifying those core values? And Wade, I'll hand it to you and then I'll weigh in.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, so yeah, thanks, Fran. Yeah, so what I would do is there's a twofold process here. I think that management needs to drive that initiative to determine what your core values are. But I think that what they can do is they can build a framework so that employees can weigh in on what the core values are. So depending on your culture, it could look like, here are a draft set of core values or some ideas we think are core values, and then you can get employees to weigh in. Or you can maybe start with the employees and you can do focus sessions to gather information about what we think core values are and then draft them at a certain level. Regardless of how you do it, I think it's important to get buy-in from employees, because then I think they will more readily commit to those core values. And I'll give it back to Fran for additional comments.
Yeah, so depending on the organization, I would encourage you to ask your manager or the people that you work with closely whether the company has, value statements or value systems. And if not, suggesting to your team members and management that you develop them together so that you have a value system that is understood by all. And like Wade said, it takes everyone embracing those values and understanding what they are to really integrate into the company, into the company culture. So if you don't have them or you don't know what they are, I encourage you to engage with your team members and managers to start to define them, because it will be a really wonderful exercise to go through as an organization and will provide a lot of clarity in your decision-making process. So I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to send this one over to Anita first, and then maybe Wade, and it is this. What do you think is the most important ingredient in creating and maintaining an ethical culture in a company?
Thank you, Fran. From an HR perspective, I think transparency, being transparent from the top down, open and honest to the organization, making sure that there is accessibility to leadership by employees. All too often, I have several conversations with employees that are fearful of reaching out to their senior leaders or their managers because they don't have that connection, or the manager hasn't provided them an opportunity or a environment where they can come in and talk. Just being honest, open, and transparent, I think, is the primary key to success in building those trusted relationships as well. Wade? Oh, you're on mute.
You're muted. Nope.
No.
You're still on mute, Wade.
Still on mute.
Oh. Okay, I'll take it from here. So we are at the time, and we are so grateful that you all joined us today. Again, this webinar will be available via video, and so you can have access to it. We encourage you all to engage with your coworkers and your managers on an ongoing values conversation and ethics conversation in your organization. You know, if you have tough decisions to make, utilize the ethical GPS that Wade has laid out. It's a really valuable tool for each of us in both our personal and professional lives. So with that, we really appreciate your time and for joining us today, and we look forward to the next webinar with you, and have a wonderful Thursday and a happy Thanksgiving. There's much to be grateful for. We're all healthy and employed, and on to next and better things. So have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you.